what, our business, that's the best business there is, being a hooker. I mean, you got it, you sell it, you still got it. Tough to make sense, Johnny.
Yeah, I bet it is, yeah.
Tough. Hey, guest, all right.
You want to show this film clip? We got a film clip from your movie.
Yeah, I know. Well,
would you like him to see that?
whatever you say.
Good morning. It's Saturday, Enemies of My Country Saturday, October the 28th, and this is The True Conservative. Welcome to all the butchers, bakers, and candlestick makers out there. I'm Ron, your host, and the only true conservative in the United States today. So today, after the Serenity prayer and a little gypsy rumba, we will have no free lunch, rules for radical conservatives, rules for retrogrades, rules for patriots, Bishop-barron, Ayn Rand quote of the day, Donald Trump, and the enemies of my country. All that and more when I get back. God, grant me the serenity to accept the things I shouldn't change, the courage to change the things I should, and the wisdom to know the difference. Amen. Thank you. And now there's no free lunch. 250 Economic Truths by David Bahnsen.
Those who favor a grand plan over experimentation fail to understand the role that failed experiments play in creating progress in society. Failures quickly and efficiently signal what doesn't work, minimizing waste and redirecting scarce resources to what does work. A market economy is an experimental discovery process in which business failures are inevitable, and any attempt to eliminate them only ensures even greater failures. Charles G. Koch. Markets as recurring discovery processes is a concept I want all readers to fully grasp. I can herald the miracles and achievements of markets all day long, but if I ignore how and why markets perform this way, I fail in my aim. We must not shy away from the comprehensive story of markets, that in their role as a discovery process, they uncover successes and failures. Effective market mechanisms purge those failures, and we are all better for it.
And that was There's No Free Lunch by David Bahnsen. Back in a minute. Thank you. And now, rules for radical conservatives.
Wise guys and dolls. As is well known, as they used to say in the old Soviet Union, the Democratic Party has been, practically from its inception, indistinguishable from a criminal enterprise. A profitable haven for thieves, embezzlers, drunks, plagiarists, gangsters, slavers, shysters, segregationists, seditionists, fellow travelers, manslaughterers, and even murderers. If you look under nearly every rock since Plymouth, you'll find a Democrat slithering around in the ooze. And yet, amazingly, as the proud party of slavery, segregation, secularism, and when necessary, sedition, we've been able to pin some of the biggest scandals in American history, from Teapot Dome to the Depression to Watergate, on you guys. We are nothing if not resourceful. Still, as a card-carrying member of the party, I am damn proud of our record, and will happily match it up against that of any great crime family, from the Borgias to the Bourbons to the Gambinos. In fact, whenever I'm attending a Democratic convention, thrilling to speeches and promises of the great things to come, it reminds me of nothing more than an event that happened way back in 1929, when a group of great and wise men gathered by the breakers in Atlantic City, New Jersey, and set America on a course for a century to come. They were men, sorry ladies, no women allowed at the time, except for hookers, from all sorts of different backgrounds, a glorious mosaic of Christian, atheist, and Jew, who had a vision for the future of America. And yes, they could. I'm speaking, of course, of the Atlantic City Crime Conference of 1929, the event that put the organized in organized crime. Everybody who was anybody was there that May weekend. From Chicago, Al Capone, fresh off ordering the St. Valentine's Day Massacre, Jake Greasy Thumb Gusick, and Moses Annenberg, father of the late Walter Annenberg. Yes, that Annenberg. From New York, Frank Costello, Lucky Luciano, Owen Madden, Joey Adonis, Meyer Lansky, Benny Siegel, and Arthur Flegenheimer, a.k.a. Dutch Schultz. From Philadelphia, Waxy Gordon and Nig Rosen. From Detroit, A.B. Bernstein and his Purple Gang. From Cleveland, Mo Dollitz. From Kansas City, John Lazia. Standing in for Harry Truman's boss, the Irish gangster Tom Pendergast. Yes, there were giants on the earth in them days. Which got me to thinking about a miniseries I might want to pitch. about a group of mobsters who take over an American political party and heroically not only lead it to victory, but mostly manage to survive and stay out of jail. Talk about a triumph of the human spirit. A miniseries set not in old passe Atlantic City, but in the new playground for the rich and criminal, Martha's Vineyard, Massachusetts. Every net in this crazy town will lap it right up, too, since all the network heads are, of course, Democrats, have summer houses on the vineyard, and would love to see their heroes, scratch that, friends and neighbors on the little screen each week. Naturally, I'm calling it The Untouchables. This time, it's personal. Now, for you civilians out there, the way you pitch something here in Hollywood is by comparing it to something the exec already knows. No point in trying to sell it on its merits. Let's say we're doing a teen sex comedy slasher film. It's Gidget Goes Hawaiian meets Friday the 13th. Or an uplifting drama. The Nun Story meets The Wrestler. You get the idea. So, my series, a story about a group of people who are only trying to help, albeit behind the business end of a gun, is basically The Godfather meets Aaron Brockovich. Meet our dramatis personae. Don Vito Corleone, Aaron Burr. The history of the Democrats started off with a bang, literally, when Aaron Burr shot and killed Alexander Hamilton during a duel in 1804. But this was no ordinary duel. Burr was the sitting vice president of the United States under Thomas Jefferson at the time, while Hamilton not only was one of the founding fathers and a co-author of the Federalist Papers, but also the first Secretary of the Treasury. And did Burr suffer any kind of penalty for it? Of course not. Indicted for murder in both New York and New Jersey, the duel was in Weehawken. He skated in both states, a development that happily would become both predictable and habitual for us Democrats. For good measure, Burr was one of the founders of Tammany Hall, the gold standard in big city machine politics corruption. No wonder he maintains such an honored place in our pantheon of heroes. Richard F. Boss Croker, Christopher Dodd, the very incarnation of the Irish panjandrums and poobahs who ran Tammany Hall. Motto, stealing elections for the Democrats since 1797. From the end of Boss Tweed's reign, through the heyday of Sachem's Honest John Kelly and Silent Charlie Murphy. Sure, you've never heard of Croker or any of the other great Tammany Sachems, but then you'd never heard of Senator Dodd either, until he moved his family from Connecticut, the state he represented in Congress, to Iowa, in order for him to pursue a quixotic and wholly useless presidential campaign during the 2008 election. The Irish-born Croker beat a murder rap, ran New York City's Democratic machine with an iron fist, took bribes from all and sundry, amassed a huge fortune in his little tin box, and eventually retired to his castle in Ireland, one step ahead of the law. Dodd, the famous friend of Angelo, was exonerated by the State Ethics Committee. Stop laughing. Of any wrongdoing regarding Countrywide Mortgage or just about anything else, but for some mysterious reason chose not to run for re-election. Like Boss Croker, Dodd may well choose to end his days puttering around his own estate in the old sod. Happy Jack Mulroney, Joseph P. Kennedy, the partially paralyzed, thoroughly psychotic leader of the Gopher Gang in Hell's Kitchen, which terrified the west side of Manhattan with its bravado and its brutality, is one of our great role models. He had a dream of when the poor West Side Irish of Hell's Kitchen would escape their lowly potato farmer origins and make their way up from crime to, well, getting into Harvard. Happy Jack may not have lived long enough to see his fantasy become reality, but his amoral ruthlessness certainly made it possible for the generations who came after him to realize his version of the American dream. The patriarch, meanwhile, was Owen Madden's bootlegging partner during Prohibition, ruthless political operative, Hollywood mogul, chairman of the SEC, ambassador to the Court of St. James, unabashed admirer of Adolf Hitler, and philanderer extraordinaire, who flaunted his relationship with Gloria Swanson in front of his long-suffering wife and their children. Speaking of whom, the Corleones, the Kennedy family. Who better to portray them than the children of the patriarch? Sonny Corleone, Joe Jr., the apple of his daddy's eye. Bought the farm during the big one, so he can play the part as a younger guy. Then we get the sainted Jack Kennedy to step in. After all, he managed to squeeze in a couple of years as POTUS between trysts with Marilyn Monroe and party girl Judith Campbell, who split her recreational bedroom time between JFK and Chicago mobster Sam Momo Giancana, so memorably described by police as a snarling, sarcastic, ill-tempered, sadistic psychopath. Then, alas, they both die in a hail of gunfire. Fredo Corleone, that would be Bobby, affectionately known as that little shit Bobby. Poor Bobby could not get anything right, beginning his career as a liberal icon as Senator Joseph McCarthy's B-team hatchet man, sitting at the right hand of the even more evil Roy Cohn. As an aide to Arkansas Senator John McClellan, Bobby took part in the farcical Senate Labor Rackets Committee hearings of 1957 through 59, during which his father's old business associate Madden, who was a resident of Bill Clinton's hometown of Hot Springs, conveniently had McClellan in his pocket and on his payroll, was briefly called and then dismissed. Once his brother was elected president, Bobby coincidentally found himself, at 35, Attorney General of the United States, where he could indulge his vendettas against the very racketeers who had helped both his father and brother, not to mention also illegally wiretapping Martin Luther King Jr., thus providing FBI Director J. Edgar Hoover with countless hours of salacious listening pleasure. The runt of the litter, he had to deal with sloppy seconds in the girlfriend department, and was constantly heard to shout, "I'm smart." Like Fredo, his life was ended with a bullet to the head, fired by a Palestinian in the opening salvo of the domestic front of the Arab-Israeli conflict. Michael Corleone, Ted Kennedy. No gangland function would be complete without a dearly departed. Forget the expulsion from Harvard. Forget Chappaquiddick. Forget the poor ex-wife. Forget even the unpleasantness at Palm Beach with William Kennedy Smith, where a classic Kennedy evening of fun ended with an unfortunate rape accusation. Like youngest son Michael, Edward Moore Kennedy sought to expiate a life in the rackets with the forgiveness of Holy Mother Church.
And that was first half of Chapter 7, Rules for Radical Conservatives by David Kahane. Back in a minute. Thank you. And now, rules for retrogrades. 40 tactics to defeat the radical left.
Rule 7. Never let radical mischief go unpunished. Make a stink about everything. Mod cons are habitually cowardly and lazy, but they fancy themselves magnanimous, charitable, and wise, whitewashing their indifferentism and chronic failure to react to grievous insults as stateliness and poise and being the bigger man, and all sorts of other delirious euphemisms. Mod cons have afforded radicals so much leniency in deportment and speech that radicals now believe that they can say and do anything to a retrograde without fear of reproach. It is this abdication of the duty to counterpunch that has allowed the conduct of radicals to devolve to its current critical level of vile coarseness. It is this abdication of the duty to well with righteous anger that has enabled the Antifa mob to run amok through large portions of various urban areas, committing batteries on innocent passerby with impunity. It is this abdication of the duty to defend our honor that has relegated those not on board with radical propaganda to de facto second-class citizen status. Radicals have successfully handed down to Western society an unofficial but despotic code of conduct. They have shuttered our ability to speak truth freely. They have set forth rules dictating what sorts of things we may joke about without running afoul of the thought police. They've narrowed our styles of dress and personal adornment by admonishing us about cultural appropriation. They've dictated the proper ratio for women and minority appearances in movies and television. They've twisted our arms to make us pretend that men who grow out their hair, shave their Adam's apples, speak with a phony lisp, and wear gaudy dresses are actually women. And the way that radicals have been able to get society to accede to their fell new code of conduct is by grievance mongering. They gripe, complain, and take offense about everything that doesn't conform to their bizarre sensibilities. But not only do they gripe, complain, and take offense, they also call corporate offices, write letters to Congress, picket businesses, and threaten boycotts. In fact, they have special institutions like the Corporate Accountability Project dedicated to policing whether businesses are sufficiently woke or if they need to be cudgeled into compliance with the new code of conduct. Radicals' reactionary impulse, along with their assiduous commitment to following their initial umbrage with tangible demands for redress, often at the point of an economic bayonet, is the reason that we feel a subconscious pang of guilt when we say something true but politically incorrect. It's the reason that all burglars in home security commercials have to be Caucasian, despite the fact that blacks and Hispanics have a much higher crime rate per capita. It's the reason that in crime shows, hotshot lawyers at top law firms are reliably depicted as being sassy women, despite the fact that the overwhelming number of top law firm partners are men. It's the reason we have to call Bruce Jenner Caitlyn. It's the reason we have to pretend fat women make suitable fashion models. It's the reason we have to pretend that rap and graffiti are art. It's the reason we have to pretend that wives and not husbands are the head of households. Retrogrades need to reassert our fighting spirit. When we witness an injustice, when we see a serious breach of decorum or decency, when marketing departments choose to make us the butt of their jokes, we need to get mad, and we need to actualize the potential energy of our initial anger into hot, messy, kinetic energy by protesting, writing letters, making phone calls, and organizing non-monolithic boycotts. For too long have we abided white men being universally portrayed on television as fat, stupid, subservient slobs. For too long have we tolerated razor companies that scolded men for toxic masculinity. For too long have we allowed major retailers to peddle slutty nun costumes in the run-up to Halloween. For too long have we watched an NFL that mandates that grown men wear pink to raise money for a disease that primarily affects women. For too long have we let Tide commercials show emasculated house dads doing laundry on weekdays while their careerist wives are at work. For too long have we let Antifa bully old women. For too long have we allowed unfunny, loud-mouthed comedians to celebrate abortion publicly and cut the head off of Trump effigies. For too long have we patronized anti-American Hollywood movies and award shows. For too long have we financed an NBA that boycotts states because they don't let psychologically unstable and sexually confused men use women's restrooms. For too long have we let homosexual depravity be thrust in our faces in commercials and sitcoms. Tolerate this abuse no longer. As Dylan Thomas exhorts, do not go gentle into that good night. It's time to get mad and resolve ourselves to punishing radical mischief. Verbally chastise wrongdoers. Seek to get those who use employment positions to advance radicalism fired from their jobs. Flood customer feedback centers with letters and negative reviews. Do anything, and do it loudly and with aplomb. But most of all, stop doing nothing. The only way to stop a bully is by punching him in the mouth. Hard.
And that was Rule 7, From Rules for Retrogrades, 40 Tactics to Defeat the Radical Left by Timothy and David Gordon. Back in a minute. Thank you. And now, Rules for Patriots by Steve Deese.
Instead of wasting more time on the rotting corpse that is the GOP, better to get to work now on what will inevitably take its place. Short-term thinking is what got us here in the first place. Number 2, political impact. Here's the cost. Leaving the Republican Party would essentially hand almost every election of consequence to the Democrats for the foreseeable future and render conservatives meaningless in the grand scheme of things. Furthermore, if no longer held accountable by conservatives, you'll likely see the Republican Party ruling class openly conspire now with Democrats to continue to grow government, which means liberty will be lost even quicker. This rash move would take us quicker to irrelevancy. Benefit. The Republican Party ruling class is already conspiring with Democrats to grow government, despite our presence. In 2013, they passed the largest tax increase of 20 years. That's just one example. At least if we're no longer covering for these sellouts, we can recover some integrity lost by associating with the tarnished GOP brand and perhaps have an honest conversation with the American people about where we're headed for once. By forming a third party, we become de facto independents, and instead of being taken for granted, we become a crucial swing vote. Number 3, organization. Cost. Sure, there are days when the idea of bolting the GOP sounds great, but it's not feasible. The two most viable right-of-center third parties, the Libertarian and Constitution parties, still don't have consistent ballot access in all 50 states. Good luck recruiting candidates without ballot access. Good luck raising money without candidates. And good luck moving your agenda without money. The reality is the two dominant parties have made this kind of effort almost impossible without unprecedented fundraising/legal effort to build up to it. I don't like it. I wish that weren't the case. But it is what it is. Benefit. That was the same argument used against our founding fathers when they wanted to declare their independence. If there's anything American history has taught us, it's that when we step out on faith and principle, Providence handles the rest. One great way to ignite such an effort is to have leaders with the charisma, vision, and integrity lead the way in inspiring others to act on the courage of their convictions. Maybe some of those leaders will emerge if we step out on faith. Founding fathers like George Washington and Thomas Jefferson became the men we know them as today because they rose to the occasion when history needed them. Number 4, the future. Here's the cost. Most of us would agree the party is broken, but let's not throw the baby out with the bathwater here. The brokenness of the party reflects the cultural brokenness of the times in which we live. All private organizations are only as good as the people inhabiting them. Any new organization will eventually just develop the same problems that GOP has now. You can't expect a political party to have more moral purity than the culture as a whole. Still, reform is necessary. Instead of reinventing the wheel, why not encourage members of the Constitution and Libertarian parties to infiltrate the GOP? Many local and state Republican Party organizations across the country are in dire need of people. Who says those people can't be people of principle? Let's do to the GOP from the bottom up what the progressives already did to the Democrat Party. There's no reason we can't overrun the party's infrastructure and put our own people in there. Benefit. Some libertarians tried this, and look what the party bosses did to them at the Rules Committee meeting prior to the 2012 convention in Tampa. That was Soviet-style politics. Of course, you can't expect a private organization to be more righteous than the culture, but that actually proves my point. We are aligned with people who don't share our moral value system and have proven they will do things to beat us they would never do to Democrats. And they'll even use Fox News and other conservative media to do it. The time, talent, and treasure wasted on reforming the GOP is like trying to funnel foreign aid for the hungry through a corrupt local warlord. Whatever we send just ends up in his pocket. Let's face it, this whole debate is moot anyway, because the party bosses are in the process of betraying us first. Thus, the longer we wait, the harder it will be to do what we'll eventually have to go ahead and do anyway. Now that you've had a chance to weigh the pros and cons of each side of this argument, it's time for you to decide. I don't know about you, but I don't think this is a clear-cut call. In fact, I see compelling arguments of evidence on both sides. But what if I told you that you may not have to choose? That you might be able to have what amounts to a third party without starting completely over and losing the ground you've already taken? When I pitched the idea of this book to some friends of mine, they were concerned that the other side would read it and then know our playbook and use it against us. But I explained to them that's not possible, because this attack plan only works with our worldview. The reason you don't see too many Republican leaders using these 10 commandments of political warfare, and we've had to cite several of the same names over and over again as examples of Republicans that do, is because most Republican leaders can't use them. They don't have the worldview to use them, so it wouldn't work for them even if they tried. They'd simply be exposed as posers. For these tactics only work for those with conviction. Thus, they have to resort to tactics that look more in line with what the left does than what you just read in this book. If they ever actually deploy any tactics at all, that is, most of the time they don't even do that. They simply wait until their soulless consultants, who are usually dumber than they are, tell them what to think. If you put the commandments in this book to practical use wherever you have influence, you're going to be able to separate the wheat from the chaff real quick like. Whether that's at your state legislature, a town hall hosted by your congressman who's home for recess, your local state party, when you're running for office, or even casual conversation among friends and families. That's one of the things these commandments are meant to do. Here's another thing. For too long, we have mistaken friendlies for friends. Friendlies are people you can align with on a temporary basis when your vested interests are mutual. But those aren't long-lasting relationships. As circumstances change, your friendlies can become your enemies once your vested interests no longer intersect. Now, friends stick closer than a brother. Friends get in a foxhole with you. Friends have your back when the going gets tough. Friends share your convictions and mission. And although at times you may disagree on how best to carry it out, you're both aiming for the same end goal. Most of the Republican leaders we have aligned ourselves with are friendlies, but they are not our friends. This explains why at the time they seem so right on, and at other times so far off. They're so right on when we have mutually beneficial vested interests, and so far off when we don't. Sometimes they'll shield us from the firing squad aiming for us, and then sometimes they'll join it. If they were friends, they'd have the same angst and sense of urgency for our civilization's future that we have. They wouldn't need prodding or pressure to take a stand. We wouldn't have to worry about what will happen the minute we stop hounding them to do the right thing. Increasingly, our friendlies have become less and less friendly. But instead of letting our friendlies use us, why don't we use them? Children see things in extremes, but adults draw distinctions. We need to stop having a childlike relationship with the GOP, where we rely on the party to save America and treat its big names like our favorite athletes. Hey, I'll trade you a Marco Rubio rookie card for a Paul Ryan All-Star. How ridiculous does that sound? Yet, that's often how we've behaved. Political parties prey on that sort of cult of personality, and they encourage it, for it means politics becomes about personalities, not about principles. Personalities are much easier to manipulate. Principled leadership comes with a cost and often requires sacrifices like lives, fortunes, and sacred honor that a ruling class would prefer not to make. Here's my big idea. We don't owe this party any loyalty. I repeat, we don't owe this party any loyalty. One more time, in case you missed it. We don't owe this party any loyalty. They owe us. There would have never been a Reagan era to wax nostalgic about if it weren't for us. The Republican Party was going nowhere fast after the Watergate era until the birth of the conservative movement. The Republican victories of 2010 were done in spite of the party. They didn't want champions like Ted Cruz, remember? We had to drag them kicking and screaming into the winner's circle. The Republican Party didn't make us. We made them. We don't take the orders around here. We give them. Or at least we ought to be. We don't take any sanctimonious lectures from our employees about how half a loaf is better than none or the lesser of two evils. We run the show. So we determine what the acceptable standard is, who met that standard, and how to hold them accountable when they don't meet it. I no longer feel a compulsion to vote for every Republican opposite every Democrat, and I haven't voted straight ticket Republican in years. I came to realize that's the coward's way out. Doesn't mean I'm voting for Democrats, but it does mean I'm also no longer voting for Democrats calling themselves Republicans. But Steve, some of you will say, at least a bad Republican is better than a good Democrat. If by now you haven't realized that a bad Republican and a good Democrat are one and the same, immediately go back to page 1 and start rereading the book. But Steve, some of you will say, in our system majority rules, so even a bad Republican will still vote Republican for leadership positions. So what? Why in the Sam Hill should I care if John Boehner and Nancy Pelosi is Speaker of the House? Not once, not twice, not thrice, but 4 times in 2013, Boehner allowed bills to pass out of the House of Representatives a majority of Republicans didn't vote for. 2 of those were the largest tax increase in the last 20 years and the largest tax increase of all time, Obamacare. So what's the point of having a majority then? At least when Pelosi is giving us failed policies and statism, I can blame it on her and the Democrats, and then recruit good candidates to challenge them in the next election. Bad Republicans are actually worse than Democrats in that respect because they depress the conservative base and make it harder to get our people engaged. Think about it. Are you more eager to take on the perp who breaks into your house and threatens your loyal and loving wife, or the disloyal wife you found out was cheating on you?
And that was the next part of Chapter 14, Rules for Patriots, How Conservatives Can Win Again by Steve Deese. Back in a minute. Thank you. Now, Bishop Robert Barron.
There is a reason why, as Catholics, we don't believe in the Protestant doctrine of grace alone. Before I tell you that, I want you to watch this Protestant pastor trying to convince 2 Catholic boys to believe in this doctrine. Here we go.
Put your trust in Jesus. The Bible says you will be saved by grace through faith, not of yourselves. It is a gift of God, not of works, so that you can't boast. So you can't get to heaven and say, I did some good stuff to get here. No, it's completely by grace alone.
As Catholics, we believe that we need to cooperate with the God-given grace through our good works to attain salvation. And that is where Martin Luther went wrong. Let's listen to what Bishop Barron has to say about this.
If Luther had stopped at saying gratia prima, I'd be okay. Grace first. The trouble was he pushed it and said gratia sola, by grace alone. And that's where the Catholic Church, relying on its ancient tradition and its roots very much in the Bible and the Church Fathers, balked and said no.
And that was Bishop Robert Barron. Back in a minute. Thank you. Now, the Ayn Rand quote of the day.
Is against.
I'd like to know your opinion on the United States' foreign policy and what is happening in the Middle East right now.
Right now, I'm not sure we know what's happening. I think that the United States foreign policy has been disgraceful for years, for decades. I would say roughly since the New Deal, and in part even before that. But if you mean whose side should one be on, Israel or the Arabs, I would certainly say Israel because it's the advanced, technological, civilized country amidst a group of almost totally primitive savages who have not changed for years and who are racist and who resent Israel because it's bringing industry and intelligence and modern technology into their stagnation.
The philosophy of objectivism.
Thank you. Now, a little bit of Donald Trump.
When I'm back in the White House, America's enemies will now once again, and they're going to know it, that if you try to kill our citizens, we will kill you. We will kill you. I told them all that. We had no problem. We had no problem. 3 years ago, we had no problem. For 4 years, nobody even, this is unthinkable. I mean, I just watch and see what's happening. It's unthinkable. This couldn't have happened. Mark, couldn't have happened. Although you maybe were more deeply involved than anybody, but I don't think you even believed a thing like this could have happened, Mark. If you spill a drop of American blood, we will spill a gallon of yours. We do not. When I'm back.
And that was Donald Trump, former President Donald Trump. Back in a minute. Thank you. And now the next chapter in The Enemies of My Country.
9. CIA Headquarters, Special Activities Center, Operations Center F2. Duchess looked across the large room, surveying her kingdom with the full court present for the mission ahead. The Operations Center was known in shorthand parlance as an OPCEN, the center of the universe for a raid in progress. It looked like a small movie theater more than anything else, with a few key exceptions. Instead of a single screen, there were several, a large central monitor surrounded by smaller flat screens, each broadcasting black and white surveillance footage from various aircraft and unmanned platforms. The largest screen was committed to broadcasting the main act, the feed from an agency UAV, offset from the objective as it angled its camera toward a low crest adjacent to the target building. Descending from the crest were 5 tiny, shadowy figures that advanced with their rifles raised. And instead of spectator seating, the ascending floor tiers around the screens were lined with desks and workstations, staffed by the myriad support personnel involved. At the front, paradoxically, were the least important personnel, the LNOs, or liaison officers, who existed to provide the CIA with a personal link to the many organizations capable of supporting the current effort. Duchess's gaze flitted to them in sequence, their ranks representing ties to the Joint Special Operations Command, United States Special Operations Command, Joint Terrorism Task Force, and the Joint Personnel Recovery Agency, among others. Her LNOs had a difficult job, as nearly all of their partner organizations were denied information until the very second their assistance was required, at which time the liaison would leverage, and very possibly at the same time burn, a long-held professional contact required to administer support. Then she glanced to the higher tiers, both literally and metaphorically. These were the main staff shop representatives, each corresponding with their military equivalents. J1, Joint Personnel. They possessed the name, next of kin information, and pay status of everyone involved at the immediate and peripheral levels. If an agency operator got shot in the face in the next 6 minutes, the S1 staff would have a car arriving at the parent's or wife's doorstep in a matter of hours, quietly explaining how their beloved had just perished in a training accident. Then there was the J2, or Joint Intelligence. These fine representatives were wired into every agency asset at all levels of intelligence, whether HUMINT, human source, ELINT, electronic, SIGINT, signals, or COMINT, communications. Their real-time analysis would be critical, unless everything went according to plan, which it very rarely did. Next up was J3, Joint Operations. Their personnel held a direct link not only to the operational assets required to execute the mission, the local driver serving as her team's primary exfiltration method came immediately to mind, but also to military and other governmental agency assets at every level of the chain of command, up to and including Duchess's direct representatives in the Office of the Secretary of Defense. Beyond them was the J4 section, made up of supply personnel who could administer emergency airdrops for resupply, as well as the J6 staff, who maintained communications with the ground team and everyone they'd need to speak with in order to accomplish their mission, which, at present, consisted primarily of Duchess herself. Which was why, she knew, the concentric arrangement of desks was set up in increasing order of importance relative to their shouting distance from her. She presided like a judge at the highest point in the rear of the room, a throne from which she wielded the ultimate authority as far as this operation was concerned. But since the outset of the agency's targeted killing program, Duchess had to share her workstation with a second chair, one that held almost as much power as her own, and that seat was filled by Joanne's tall and bulky frame. Joanne chose that moment to speak, her northern accent ringing out with particularly choice words to commemorate the occasion. "This never gets old, does it?" she said. "Watching our shooters terrorize the terrorists." Duchess sucked her teeth, considering that Joanne had never actually been in the field. She replied, "The best revenge is to be unlike him who performed the injury." "Isn't it a little early in the day to be quoting Shakespeare?" "Marcus Aurelius," Duchess corrected her, looking over to see Joanne appearing lost in thought watching the screens, as if she hadn't heard at all. She was methodically spinning her class ring around one finger, the garnet stone glinting as it turned toward the light. Duchess sighed. How a farm girl from the Midwest had managed to choose the U.S. Naval Academy was beyond her, but Joanne had done just that to begin a military intelligence career that had taken her to the staff offices of SEAL Team 6. Then she'd had a staff slot at the Joint Special Operations Command as the intelligence chief for current operations, overseeing operations from the Fort Bragg OPSEN that served as ground zero for every high-profile U.S. military special operations raid in the world. Her entire career progression defied logic. Intelligence people were virtually second-class citizens in the Navy with little influence over their career paths. They were considered lucky to get a single 2-year tour with special operations. To make it to the Tier 1 level, followed by a stint at JSOC, implied some heavy-hitting personal connections that Joanne seemed outrageously incapable of establishing, much less maintaining. And as if that weren't enough, once her JSOC assignment was done, Joanne had been hand-picked, not by Duchess, of course, to serve as the head military liaison to the CIA for Project Longwing, the code name for the upstart targeted killing program that was entering its third mission execution without a single dead target to show for it. Yet, even as Duchess chafed at the presence of military oversight by Commander Joanne Brown, she had to admit the Navy officer had not just stood her ground on the matter of arguing against a drone strike, but also delivered the C-17 support for a halo infiltration of her shooters. For the time being, that put her in Duchess's good graces. The UAV representative called out, "Ma'am, we're about to lose coverage if I don't bring it closer." Joanne was shaking her head before Duchess could get the words out. "Don't you dare," she said. "Turn it around, but don't break the lateral boundary. We are not risking audible." Duchess tapped her chin in momentary disbelief. The UAV community seemed to think their low-altitude drones were much quieter than they actually were, and the last thing she needed was for the faint buzzing noise to alert the quarry, causing him to flee their grasp a second time. The UAV rep nodded, turning back to his workstation without a moment's hesitation. No one contradicted the OPSEN chief, who required instant compliance lest the mission devolve into chaos at the first complication. But Duchess knew that her authority, while considerable, was relative rather than absolute. That latter distinction belonged not to Duchess or Joanne, but to one Thomas Gosweiler, the aging but very powerful senator chairing the Senate Select Committee on Intelligence. In addition to mandating the checks and balances arrangement of Joanne's presence, his current position allowed him a few abilities that served as a potential hindrance to her. Namely, he could invite himself to agency ops, provided they occurred while he was not in session, a technicality that she was currently circumventing by virtue of timing the assault with his weekly Senate prayer breakfast. Of secondary importance was his ability to impact her career, or, worse yet, funding for special programs. It wasn't that the senator was an insurmountable obstacle. The real problem, Duchess thought, was that Gosweiler wasn't stupid. Her ability to tap dance around the fringes of logic while pushing for a necessary tactical end was extremely limited with him, and for all the fervor with which he extolled his faith in Jesus and forgiveness, he was remarkably short-sighted with agency leeway during the conduct of paramilitary operations. Beside her, Joanne said, "I've been thinking about what you said, about why BK would return to the area based on what you saw in Yemen." Duchess canted her head to the side, curious about what conclusions her colleague would have reached in that regard. "And?" Joanne said, "He's tethered. There's something in that area he can't leave behind without forsaking his purpose. Some cargo, something he can't function without. Was that the case in Yemen?" "That's right," Duchess said, mildly impressed. "It was a cargo that the terrorist wasn't willing to abandon." "So, what was it?" Duchess swallowed, feeling her face go slack. "A bomb?" Then the J2 turned toward her, relaying information from a man in headphones beside him, a native Arabic speaker, kept on hand for just this eventuality. "BK just activated his phone. Looks like he's making a call." Before she could reply, David spoke over the radio intercom. "Raptor 9-1, this is Suicide Actual. No movement on the objective. Target phone location has been confirmed with ground scan. Request clearance for early execution." Duchess replied first to the J2. "Record full transcript for the duration." BK's call was about to get cut short, she thought, as she lifted the hand mic and transmitted, "Suicide Actual, be advised, target is using his phone at this time. He may have received early warning and be preparing to squirt. You are clear to execute." David's tone was clinical. "Suicide Actual, copies all. Executing time, now." Things happened quickly after that. The UAV feed shifted, flashing into adjusted focus settings as it captured the final glimpses of black specks, David's team, splitting into two elements as they swept toward the target building. The J2 was focused on the translator beside him, wearing headphones as he transcribed the content of BK's phone call to English. Then the J2 turned to Duchess and shouted, "The team isn't compromised. BK says he's leaving in 5 minutes, requesting some pre-planned armed escort that's inbound. Call is connected to a mobile phone somewhere in Zaranj. They're discussing a scheduled transport coming to recover. Duchess snatched the hand mic from her desk and keyed the transmit button. Her decision, of course, was no decision at all. Gosweiler had threatened to shut down the program along with her career, yes, but the ground team had a perilous link to their exfiltration point in the form of one local driver preparing to speed to the target building upon David's order. If that link was severed by the arrival of an armed convoy, the 5 contractors would be trapped in Syria, desperately trying to evade capture until Duchess and Joanne could redirect military assets. And by the time that occurred, it would be too late to save them. She spoke into the hand mic. Abort, abort, abort. How copy? No response. She transmitted again. Abort, abort, abort. We have verifiable intel on enemy assets inbound to your location. Time now. Pull back until we can reassess the threat intel. How copy? Silence. Total, abject, uncompromisable silence. Then the UAV representative turned to face her. Ma'am, it's too late. The ground team is already making entry.
And that was Chapter 9 of The Enemies of My Country by Jason Casper. Back in a minute. Thank you. This is Ron, your host, the only true conservative in the United States. Today, bidding adios to all the butchers, bakers, and candlestick makers out there, and reminding you to be honest, smart, and beautiful, and remember that the left has no authority, no power, and they can't win.